Today we will be looking at how to perform odds ratio using PSPP. So this here is a fictitious data set, and in it we have two variables, and each variable has two value or two outcomes. So we're looking basically here at being underage, and you have yes or no, and the yes or no would mean that yes, you participated in underage drinking, or no, you did not participate in underage drinking. And here we have AUD, which stands for alcohol use disorder, and it means if a person was diagnosed with alcohol use disorder or not. So we want to use PSPP to find out what are the odds of a person who participated in underage drinking having alcohol use disorder compared to those who did not participate in underage drinking. So let's consider a little bit about odds ratio. So when looking at odds ratio, the null hypothesis is saying that there are no association between the exposure and the outcome. And the alternate hypothesis would be saying there is an association between the exposure and the outcome. So essentially, because remember, we're using a sample to draw inference about a population. So the null hypothesis is saying that, at the population level, there's no association. The odds would be equal, so the odds would be 1. The alternate hypothesis is saying that there is an association, so the odds ratio will be either greater than or less than 1 at the population level. So that's what essentially we're testing when we're performing an odds ratio. So now let's get back to our data set and perform that odds ratio using PSPP. So to do this, we're going to analyze, we'll go to descriptives, and we're going to cross tabs. So analyze, descriptives, cross tabs. So let us put underage drinking in the row, on alcohol use disorder in the columns. So as for format, we're not changing anything under the format tab. For statistics, for now, because I want to show you something, we'll leave chi-square check, and you're coming to risk. So it will say your relative risk estimate. So ensure that you check risk. Click continue. When we come to cells, if you want to produce the 2x2 table, I would encourage you to take out the row, the column, and total. And then you could check OK. Then after that, you come here and you click OK. So what would have happened now? So here it's telling us that we have 320 cases, and here we have a nice 2x2 table. And in our 2x2 table, it's important to know that when you're labeling the values or you're assigning values, so whatever the outcome is, or whatever the exposure is, ensure that the lower value is assigned that. So for example, in my data set, I would have assigned 0 to yes and 1 to no. And the same for here, 0 to yes and 1 to no, so that the table comes out in this format for the regular 2x2 table that you use when you're doing odds ratio. If you do it any other way, it will misinterpret the results. So it's important that you label it like that to get this formatting of the table. So this is how the 2x2 table would look. So a chi-square test was performed that produced a p-value less than 0.05. So that tells us that there is an association, or it tells us that alcohol use disorder is dependent on underage drinking. However, it only tells that the association is present. But if you want to have an idea of what the strength of that association like, then we'd have to move down to the odds ratio. And because this is a 2x2 table, you would get also a Fisher's exact test p-value. Important to note that. So when we come down to the risk estimate, here it says that the odds ratio has a value of 6 in the sample. So it's telling us that the persons who indicated that yes, they participate in underage drinking, they were 6 times, they had a 6 times, the odds of them being diagnosed with alcohol use disorder was 6 times higher than those who did not participate in underage drinking. And if we look here at this 95% confidence interval, it shows us that the lower end is 3.27, the higher end is 10.99. So you realize that this 95% confidence interval does not include 1, which tells us that it is statistically significant. And it will also tell us that because the odds ratio does not include 1, then we reject the null hypothesis. And then we assume that there is an association between the exposure of underage drinking and the outcome of having alcohol use disorder. It's important to know that the second line here gives us what we call a relative risk. The relative risk. But it's important to know that you have to interpret differently, and it's based on how your data was collected. If your study is a prospective study, and say for example you started out with everyone who no one has been diagnosed with alcohol use disorder, but you have the persons who were exposed to underage drinking versus those who were not exposed to underage drinking, and then you follow them over a period of time, and then you look now to see those who develop alcohol use disorder versus those who didn't, then you could use that now to interpret here the risk. Or if you had data from the past that shows everyone before they develop alcohol use disorder and the outcomes after a period of time, then you could estimate risk. But here we're looking at odds ratio, but it's just important for you to know that it depends on your methodology, that you know which one you are reporting or which one you are using. But just to know that the first line gives you the odds ratio and the second line gives you the relative risk. And this is how you do this using PSPP.